Chapter 29. Jeremy sits all alone in his dimly lit cell, and staring down the opening of his last empty can of alertness. Crushing the can in his bare hand, he tosses it off to the side with the other. The two empty cans staring back at him do not put him at ease. It feels like he has been sitting there for days, but in reality, little more than an hour or so has passed since Erin had taken her leave. The weight of the world rests heavily on his eyelids, and he can barely keep his head from smashing into the floor as he leans forward to try to shake himself awake. Sitting with his forearms on his knees and his head below his shoulders, he realizes that no matter how hard he tries, he cannot hold on much longer. As his eyes slowly come to close, he begins to scream. "No!" he wails out as he brings himself to his feet and starts running around the cell, continuously screaming. Running by the cell door with his hands open, he slaps each and every post as he goes by. Jeremy stops at the concrete wall and bangs his fist over and over against it. Pulling back as far as he can, he just bangs on the wall repeatedly, while screaming through the pain in which engulfs him. "I can't do it!" he screams and continuously pounds on the cell wall. "I can't let myself fall asleep again!" He cries out as he falls to the floor and begins pounding the floor with all his might. Now on his knees, he begins swiping his fist at the wall once more. Two devilish dripping lobes are now worn by the wall from the cuts on his bare knuckles, caused from the abuse against them by the rough surface of the wall. He continues causing this damage to himself until the guard appears at the iron bars of his cell. "Stop that!" he yells out, fumbling with keys outside the cell door. Nervously searching for the key to open the cell door, he drops them on the ground. The noise of the keys smashing violently to the floor does little to curb the animalistic actions of Jeremy within the cell. After scrambling for a moment, the guard finally gets a grip on the correct key, unlocks the door, and rushes into the cell. Jumping on Jeremy, he holds the boy fiercely to the ground. "Quit it, kid!" he yells out. "What the hell's wrong with you?" He blunders out as he struggles to keep Jeremy still. Jeremy continues to flop around, trying to break free of the officer's hold as the officer frees one hand to use on the radio connected to the side of his belt. "Hey! I need a little help in here!" he yells into the radio while holding down the large button on the side. The radio is knocked from his hands, and he uses the hand to slam Jeremy's head bluntly into the concrete ground. The radio is knocked from his hands, and he uses this hand to slam Jeremy's head bluntly into the cement ground. There is now a pool of crimson on the floor, matching those on the wall, as Jeremy feels warmth dripping from his forehead. The officer holds Jeremy's face into the pool of blood, and from across the cell, Jeremy hears the radio stating that assistance was on its way. Jeremy knew that he had to escape if he had any chance of keeping himself awake. He must stay awake, so nobody else dies. The guard is thrown back by the force of Jeremy's elbow connecting firmly to his jaw. Jeremy then scrambles to get on top and claws his way to the cop's belt. Reaching the belt, he pulls the guard's club from its holster. Making his way to his feet, Jeremy stands and strikes down with the club with a horrifying thud against the side of the guard's head, rendering his pursuer unconscious. His hands trembling after feeling the horrifying impact. "I'm sorry," he says sincerely, apologetic for what he has had to do. Kneeling down above the guard, he removes the black pistol from the holster of the unconscious man, who now lies in the pool of Jeremy's blood. Holding the cold steel death dealer in his hands, Jeremy is not quite sure of what to do with it, or how to use it if he even does come up with a plan at all. "Shit," he says to himself. "There's some sort of safety or something on this thing, isn't there?" He moves the gun around in his hands until he finds a small switch on the side of the pistol, right next to the trigger. He flips it over in his hand, grip it firmly in shooting position. It is then that he hears the door leading to the holding cells open. As he cocks the gun's hammer back on the pistol and holds it in his hands, he nervously runs toward the door. The door opens, and as an officer makes his way through the doorway, he feels the smack of cold metal against his face. As the officer falls to the ground from the force, Jeremy once again smashes the weapon against his face on the ground. With the business end of the firearm staring eye to eye with the downed officer's bleeding face, Jeremy notices the two other men with him. Jeremy, an old man with a white beard and matching scalp, begins as he holds his hands out in a show of submission. It's okay. He takes a step toward Jeremy and takes a quick look back at the other man behind him. He's a tall, dark, heavier man in white scrubs. I am Dr. Toru, the old man states. I am here to help you. He slowly takes another step toward Jeremy. It is then that Jeremy notices the syringe sticking out of the front chest pocket of the doctor's brown coat. Jeremy points the gun at him, and the tall man takes a step forward. Dr. Toru puts his hand up in his direction to let him know to stay back. Stepping forward once more, he reaches both hands out toward Jeremy, palms up. Now, son, I hear you have been having some issues here, that you are having nightmares of some kind. Why don't you just give the gun to me and... He's cut off by the officer on the ground, going for the gun and his own belt. Hearing the movement behind him, Jeremy quickly stomps the man in the face, and the doctor reaches into his pocket, grabs the syringe, and lunges forward toward Jeremy. Jeremy grabs his wrist and quickly throws the old man against the wall, knocking him hard to the ground. Then, pointing the gun at the tall man, he quickly makes his way past him. Just as Jeremy rushes past the large man, he feels a sharp pain in the side of his arm and falls to one knee on the ground. Looking down, he spots a now empty syringe hanging loosely from the meaty tissue of his upper arm. Pulling it out, he notices the tall man bearing down on him. Closing his eyes, Jeremy raises the gun and pulls the trigger. The tall man lets out a scream even louder than the crack of the gun, and Jeremy fearfully opens his eyes. He is relieved to see that he had only hit the man in the leg. Over the ringing in his ear, he hears people rushing down the hall, and he panics. Returning to his feet, he rushes into the nearest door. He shuts it tight, looks around the dark room. It's an office, and there's a window behind the desk on the far end. Jeremy runs over to the window, pulls the cord lifting the shades above his head. Reaching above the window, he searches for the latches that would keep it locked shut. Twisting the two small latches, he finds with his hands he unlocks the window. He quickly lifts the window and breaks through the screen, stumbling to the bush below on the outside, thankful that he had only been on the first floor. Quickly, he stands up and rushes out to the street, turns to his right, and begins to run toward his home. He continues on running without looking back. It takes only a few minutes, though, for him to begin to lose coordination. He stumbles and falls to the ground shortly after his body begins to go numb. The head trauma, loss of blood, and the drugs running through his veins have finally taken their toll. He claws forward, trying to continue on, but is just unable to find the strength to do so. Tears mix with the blood in the puddle below his head as his eyes finally close, and he drifts deeply off to sleep. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying the story and how it's going, please subscribe so you can get every chapter as it comes through. Discuss in the comments, plot threads, and where you think the story's going. Share with anybody you think might find it interesting. Until then, I'll see you next video.